Thanks for joining me for this first flipped lecture. The way this is going to work is I'm going to try and do about 20 minutes here on the history of psychology and get you all the content that you need for this particular lesson. The goal in doing this is so that you can kind of watch at your own pace, and you can pause it when you need to, you can take breaks when you need to, you can watch at the time of day that you learn best instead of having to do it all in 90 minutes at once with me live for you. So I'm calling this Unit 1, Day 2, the history of psychology. We can talk about 6 different approaches to psychology, meaning 6 different ways that psychologists in the past have studied psychology. Psychology is why we think what we think and do what we do. So we're talking about 6 different approaches for why we think what we think and do what we do. Okay? While you're taking notes, what I recommend you do is in your notebook, label these notes as Unit 1, Day 2. Do it just like we practiced earlier. I'm calling this August 14th. I'm calling it the history of psychology, so you'll have a different title in your notebook. As we go, you'll write down all the Roman numerals. Make sure you have those titles. I'm going to have certain words bolded and underlined for you. Make sure you write those terms down because that's the kind of stuff that you can be quizzed on Monday or Tuesday over this stuff. Then, of course, you can underline, circle, or star things, and you can write down anything extra that you want to. But this will be an easy way for you to keep track of all the content for the course this year. So starting off, we're going to start at the beginning with a guy named Wilhelm Wundt. So those W's, he's German, so they're pronounced like V's. Wilhelm Wundt. And his approach to psychology is called structuralism. So on my paper, I'd write down Roman numeral 1, and I'd write down all this. Wilhelm Wundt and structuralism. And then my first bullet point, this whole thing is bold and underlined. It's important. We consider him the father of psychology, right? He founded the field of psychology. Not all of this stuff you have to write down. You can tell which stuff is bold and underlined. So just focus on that stuff. You don't need to write down all of it, but write down first psych lab and book, meaning he did the first psychology experiment, and he wrote the first psychology textbook. The experiment was pretty boring. What he did is he and his researchers took a ball, they would hold it out, they would drop the ball, and when the ball landed on the platform, they would have the participants press a button. That was the first psychology experiment. It was simply measuring how people experienced the world. It was measuring reaction time, right? But his whole idea of psychology, he and his student, a guy named Edward Titchener, you can write that name down. What they did was they wanted to look inward at what humans experience. They called this introspection. Intro means within, inside, and this root spect, found in spectator or spectacles. Introspection means to look inward, to look within. What Wundt believed was that psychology should be the study of what we are experiencing, what we are conscious of. We call this thinking about your thinking, or metacognition is the word that you might want to circle or star. They've been asking about metacognition in the last couple AP exams if you want to circle that term. So what Wundt would say is if you experience something, let's say that you eat a bowl of ice cream, Wundt would say that psychology is about what was eating that ice cream like for you. Break that experience down. What did it smell like? What did it taste like? What did it feel like? Were there sounds that the spoon made against the bowl? What Wundt believed, and we'll do an activity with this when we're together on Monday or Tuesday, but what Wundt believed was that psychology should be about breaking down our experiences, analyzing our experiences into the components or elements, right? Here's the word structure. That's where this word structuralism comes from, right? We're breaking down our experiences into the structures. So that was Wundt and Titchener's whole idea, okay? Now, some of you may be like, that seems odd, Mr. Jones, it seems like a bad way to do psychology. Well, you're not alone. Roman numeral 2, so start a new section in your notes. William James and Functionalism. You don't need to write this quote down, it's not bolded, not underlined. But William James said about Wundt was that introspection is like trying to catch a spinning top to see how fast it's going, or trying to turn the lights on fast enough to see what darkness looks like. It's just a really fancy academic way of saying that he thought Wundt was stupid. He thought structuralism was dumb. He thought introspection was a waste of time. If all we did was sit around and talked about how things tasted and smelled and looked and felt, we would never get to experience the world. But you can't explain psychology based on people's conscious experience. Instead, what William James, the father of American psychology, believed was that we need to focus on the reason why humans do the things they do. The function, the purpose, that's what functionalism comes from. So if you're eating a bowl of ice cream, William James said we shouldn't talk about the smell and the taste and the feel and the sights. Instead, we should focus on is why do humans eat ice cream? What is the purpose of ice cream? What is the benefit of ice cream? What is the function of ice cream? William James was a functionalist. He said we should focus on the function of the things we're doing. So he's the father of American psychology. He wrote the first English textbook. He hated introspection. He did not like Wundt. Instead, he was more like Charles Darwin. If you remember biology, Darwin's theory of evolution, natural selection, this whole idea that organisms survive based on their likelihood to reproduce. William James said that we need to focus on the reason for the things that we do. So why do we eat ice cream? Well, it's high in fat, it's high in sugar, it gives us energy so that we can survive. We can carry out our daily life. So William James would rather focus on that. So I presented two approaches to psychology: structuralism, Wundt's idea, and William James's idea, which is functionalism. Okay? So a quick question. And throughout my lectures, I'm going to have these what I call checks for understanding. It's an opportunity for me to pause and make sure you're getting the material. It's an opportunity for you to see, whoa, was I paying attention? If you got distracted, if you were on your phone, if you were on Snapchat while I was talking about Wilhelm Wundt a minute ago, now's a good time to be like, wait a second, did I actually get this? So, a little thing for you to think about. Number one, which do you prefer of the two scenarios I presented? Do you like Wundt's approach, using introspection, thinking about your senses and your experiences, right? The things you see, the things you hear, the things you smell and taste? Or do you prefer William James's approach, which is more about like, let's get to the why, let's get to the function, the purpose, the benefit? Second question, of these two, which one do you think scientists like more? Do you think they like Wundt's idea of let's sit around and talk about our experiences? Or do you think they prefer William James's approach, which is more about trying to discover the purpose, the reason, the benefits? We'll talk about these on Monday, Tuesday in class. Let's move on to the third approach. Gestalt psychology. It's a fun word. Say Gestalt is a German word, like Wilhelm Wundt. Max Wertheimer was a German researcher, so the W is pronounced like a V. And Wertheimer said that psychology isn't about breaking things down or trying to find their focus, but instead is about the brain's ability to take in a lot of information and realize what the point is, the whole, the big picture, okay? The famous quote that goes with Gestalt psychology is, the whole, W-H-O-L-E, is more important than the individual parts. If you're like, Mr. Jones, I don't know what that means. Let me try and give you an example. When I put this image up on the screen, your brain's gonna immediately see something. What does your brain see? Boom. I imagine that your brain sees the word Gestalt. That's what Wertheimer says your brain is good at. Seeing a lot of different little things and putting it together into something that makes sense, right? Wundt would disagree. Wundt would say, let's focus on the itty bitty pieces, right? This G has a gap in it. The E is on a grid. The S has this pole running through the middle of it. The T has stripes. The A and the L are mushed together. Structuralists break things down to their structures. Gestalt psychologists focus on what is the big thing your brain gets out of this. Your brain is really good at paying attention to form and patterns. If you see these words on a test or AP exam, they're probably going to ask you, they're probably talking to you about Gestalt psychology. Here's another example, okay? We have what looks like a smiley face. A Gestalt psychologist would say, we have a smiley face, we have the pieces to a smiley face. A structuralist would say the opposite. A structuralist would say, we have a couple big circles, we have some dots, we have some curves, some arcs, we got a lot of pieces. Gestalt psychologists focus on the big picture. Your brain is really good at paying attention to the big picture. Let me give you another example here. When you see this, your brain probably thinks of it as a spiky ball, like maybe some sort of a toy, right? In reality, it's just a two-dimensional set of black cones arranged in a 360-degree pattern, but your brain is really good at putting things together. That's the idea of Gestalt. Similar over here in the top right? To you, this might look like some sort of Loch Ness monster, some sort of sea snake, right? In reality, it's just a two-dimensional object, it's just a representation, but your brain is really good at putting things together, okay? One more. Your brain probably views this shape as a circle. The circle is not completed. It's just a bunch of arcs and curves and a pattern, but your brain, Gestalt psychology says, your brain is really good at putting things together into something that makes sense. Okay? So number one, structuralism. Number two, functionalism. And number three, Gestalt psychology. Number four, let's talk about psychoanalysis. I want you on your paper, once you write down this name, Sigmund Freud, pronounced Freud, it rhymes with droid. Put a star by it, or circle his name. This is a really important name that we'll come back to in a bunch of different units throughout the course of the year. But Sigmund Freud had his own idea of how psychologists do their research. Freud is famous, and here's another word for you to circle, or star. He is famous for his theory of the unconscious, okay? All the folks we've talked about so far, Wundt and James and Wertheimer, they believed that if you thought long enough, you'd eventually come to some conclusions about why we are the way we are. Freud said that, according to his theory, we are the way we are because of something buried deep within us, below the surface, something we're not even aware of ourselves. He called this the unconscious, okay? Freud said that there's three parts to who you are. There's the id, which is the selfish, animalistic part of who you are, right? He said that babies are just pure id. They only want food, and they want to sleep, and they want your attention. They're just id. They want pleasure. Freud said that as you get older, you develop what's called a super ego, a good part of you, the positive aspect to your personality, a part that wants to follow the rules and do the right thing and be liked. Okay? Freud said that your id and superego are in a battle deep within you, and you might not even be aware of it. But that what comes to the surface, what we all see, he called this your ego, your personality. It's the balance between the id, the selfish little devil inside of you, and the superego, which is the good part of you. It almost sounds like a religious theory of sorts. Here's kind of an example scenario where the id and the superego interact. And if I'm going too fast for you, remember, you can always just pause it and pick it back up when you're ready. So here's what Freud would say. Let's say that there is chocolate in front of you, okay? Two parts to your brain, to your personality, to who you are. You have your id, the selfish part of you that just says, I want chocolate. I like chocolate. Okay? Then you have the superego that says, whoa, 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 chocolate's not great for you. You're on a diet. You're in season. You're trying to lose weight, right? So what do? Well, Freud says that within you there's this battle, and your ego has to compromise. And that's who you really are. You're the kind of person that maybe you're going to have a little bit of chocolate. Maybe you're going to have a Hershey's Kiss or just a few M&Ms. That's the balance of who you are. Freud believed that psychology is about trying to understand what is happening underneath the surface. So how do we figure out what's underneath the surface? Freud said there's three strategies that we can use. The first is that we can look at our childhood, okay? The experiences we've had previously in our life, especially the way that we relate to our parents, our early guardians, that impacts what's going on deep within us, the early values and morals that we picked up from our childhood experiences. Freud said, number two, the dreams you have reveal things about who you are and why you are the way you are. And Freud also said that if you let people talk for long enough, he said, free association. If you just kind of let them ramble, talk about whatever comes to mind, that eventually will come up are the things deep within them that maybe they weren't even aware they were dealing with. Okay? He called those repressed memories. He called it repression. He said there's something below the surface that needs to come out. And the psychology should be about trying to figure out what's underneath the surface. Okay? So we have four very different, very strange ways that we think about psychology. And I want you to pause, check for understanding. Make sure you've been getting this. Number one, how would you explain Gestalt psychology to an elementary school student? Okay? So like I showed you these pictures. I have this one here, or I have this picture, or I have these over here. Which of these do you feel like best encompasses the idea that the Gestalt psychologist focuses on how the brain is really good at seeing the whole, the big picture? Second question, why was Freud's theory so revolutionary? Why is he so famous? What's interesting about Freud's theory? Number three, of these three techniques, which one do you think is probably most important for actually helping people? Is it focusing on their past experiences? Is it talking about their dreams? Or is it letting them kind of talk through their problems and issues? So just pause, just kind of answer these questions to yourself. We'll talk about them on Monday or Tuesday as well. Okay. The next two ways of thinking about psychology. Roman numeral number 5. Okay, you're taking notes. Make sure you get that down. Roman numeral number 5. Behaviorism. It's also called learning. It's the idea that we can watch people's behavior and we can measure how their behaviors change over time. These folks are the probably most famous psychologists because they love doing experiments, right? This graphic explains what behaviorists are all about. They want to see how people learn. So they're going to do research, they're going to study, they're going to observe, they're going to measure things. This term, empiricism, it means relating to empirical evidence, things that you can prove and test, okay? Watson and Pavlov are two of the most famous behaviorists. This graphic down here is a disturbing image from John Watson's experiment, the famous Little Albert study, where they tested and experimented on a little baby to see if that baby could have their behavior changed, if that baby could learn, okay? And then, of course, we have Ivan Pavlov's famous experiment. You might be able to see the dog back here, Pavlov's famous dogs, right? He was studying, could we change the dog's behavior, and how might we measure that change? Two other researchers to know, B.F. Skinner. He worked with mice. We'll talk about him later on in the year. Edward Thorndike is one of my favorites because he experimented on cats. I'm not a big fan of cats. You'll learn more about that as we go on. But they both studied how organisms, animals and humans, respond to reinforcements, meaning rewards and punishments. How can we change people's behaviors? How can we train and condition people to act a certain way based on the outcomes? The good things or the bad things that happen, whether it's timeout, an electric shock, money. How does that impact your behavior? Our sixth and final big approach to psychology is called humanism. Humanism. I call these folks the happy hippie humanists, okay? Because really, they cared about how each individual person can meet their potential, how they can grow. Humanists believe that everyone can be good. All people have potential for goodness. That's the humanist idea. Abraham Maslow, you may have seen this chart before, and I'll blow it up in a second for you, but he developed this idea that for people to reach their potential, they have certain things that have to happen along the way. He called that his hierarchy of needs. You may have studied this in another class or maybe health. It's a humanist idea that we need to help each other reach our potential. This is something that I was in a meeting last week, and they brought up the hierarchy of needs because we're in a state right now where the world's so weird that you can't reach your potential, you can't self-actualize until you've had your physical needs met, food, water, until you have your safety needs met, that you know that your health is okay, right? You're not gonna be able to have the positive friendships, and you're not gonna be able to achieve as much and feel as good about yourself if you're not able to meet these lower levels on your needs spectrum, okay? The humanist idea is that we need to support each other. So Abraham Maslow developed this. Carl Rogers is another famous humanist who said that we need to have unconditional positive regard. Put a star by this term, okay, or circle it, mark it somehow in your notebook. This is a really important idea that we need to respect and love and support one another no matter what. And that's how we can help people reach their potential. Carl Rogers was the researcher. You may have heard of a different Rogers, Mr. Rogers, who was on TV. It was all about just like loving kids and loving people and showing them respect and kindness. That is UPR. That is unconditional positive regard. Some of you might be more familiar with Mr. Bob Ross. He's a humanist. He was always optimistic and looking on the bright side and believed that people could grow and get better over time. That's the humanist idea. So these last two that I presented, behaviorism and humanism, I want you to think about some things. Another check for understanding. The first one, think about school. How might humanists and behaviorists argue? How might they disagree about how we should talk about grades and behavior in class? What might a humanist teacher say about grades versus what might a behaviorist say about grades? We'll go over this in class on Monday and Tuesday. Number two, if you're trying to help your younger sibling form a positive habit, do you want to use humanist ideas, unconditional positive regard and Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Or do you want to use behaviorist ideas, rewards and punishments and training and experimentation? What would be more helpful? Number three, what about if you have a dog or a cat that you're trying to teach a trick? You can't really teach cats tricks, but if you're trying to teach a pet a trick, would you want to use behaviorism or humanism? We'll go over these together. One last slide here. In addition to these 6 big approaches I've gone over, there are a few other approaches that are pretty self-explanatory, I think. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on them. The biological approach says that everything about your psychology, why you think what you think and do what you do, is tied to your body. It's because of your brain, right? Some folks say that psychology is really more about your thinking. This fancy word cognition, we have a whole unit on cognition. Some psychologists say it's about your language, the words you use and the memory that you have, that's why you think what you think and do what you do. It's because of the way you think, and can we change people's thinking? Other psychologists say, no. The reason why we are the way we are is because of our society, it's because of our culture. It's because of the environment that we grew up in. It's the values of the people around us. That's what shapes who we are. So I gave you 6 big perspectives, 6 Roman numerals, and then here we just have a few more. You might be wondering, Mr. Jones, you're throwing a lot at us, a lot of approaches, a lot of perspectives, a lot of ways of thinking about psychology. What's the right answer? Well, this year you're going to find there aren't always right answers, right? What we're going to do this year is use what I call an eclectic approach. It's an actual term. Eclectic means a mix, okay? Or the biopsychosocial approach, meaning we're going to acknowledge the role the body and the brain plays in your thinking and behavior, but we're also going to talk about how the mind and your unconscious shape you. We're also going to talk about how your social experiences, the culture you grew up in, your not just your nature, but also your nurture, how that impacts your behavior. So we'll be using a mix of all the theories as we go through the course this year to try and really have a good understanding of all the reasons why we think what we think and do what we do. Okay. I know this was a lot, right? It's an overview of everything, and don't feel like you need to get all of it this time, but we will have a quiz Monday or Tuesday over this content. Some ways that you can practice. 6 scenarios here of 6 professors who are each thinking differently about the world. And what I want you to do is match these 6 approaches with the 6 main fields that we went over, okay? So you can pause it, you can go through these. We'll go over the answers Monday, Tuesday, but you should be able to figure it out based on the notes if you've been paying attention, if you've been with me. Last thing is, I know that we talked about this, but I want to make sure that you all signed up for AP Classroom. So go to myap.collegeboard.org. This is the code that you'll put in. But the way that we're going to do some of our tests this year, and maybe some quizzes as well, and some free responses, we're going to be using this website. So I need all of you to make your AP Classroom account. If anything comes up that you're confused by, with the notes or with technological problems or with the content, with the structure of the class, go ahead and send me an email, okay? It's colin.jones@gcpsk12.org. You can message me through the portal. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to know what's going on, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, y'all. Good work.